In May 2007, Victoria Mill, a familiar landmark on the Chorleynew Road, Horwich, closed its doors for the last time to make way for a housing development. Its closure brought to an end 103 years of textile production on the site, and the end of the textile industry in Horwich, which had started as a cottage industry in the many farms up on the surrounding moors hundreds of years before. Victoria Mill was built by William Thomas Taylor, who decided to set up on his own following a disagreement with his former employer, John Ainscough, who ran the beehive mills nearby. At 55 and with no capital, William Taylor was taking on a huge risk, but he managed to raise the £10,000 required, and the mill opened in 1904. At first, business was bad, but then William hit on the idea of weaving waste yarn to produce terry toweling, which was much cheaper than anything else available. Suddenly the business took off and went from strength to strength. By the 1930s, W.T. Taylor's was the largest towel manufacturer in the British Empire, with 1,200 looms and 700 employees using the registered names of Wavecrest and Joyceum Nursery Squares. William's two sons, Harry and John, joined the firm and took over when William died in 1925. It was truly a family firm, involving not just the owners. Some families worked there all their lives, and often their sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters followed on. The close bond between management and workforce was fully demonstrated when fire broke out in the dye house one night in 1956. All the workforce who lived locally turned out to help to stop the fire spreading to the rest of the mill. A third generation of tailors entered the mill in the form of Jack, Michael, Ken and Joyce, who became the personnel manager. John and Harry retired as directors in 1960. By the late 60s in the textile industry, family firms were being taken over by bigger companies. Victoria Mill remained independent until 1970, when it was taken over by Spirella. Soon afterwards, the family connections ended after 70 years. For the next 30 years, the company fought hard to keep going in an increasingly competitive and shrinking industry, using its 1970s trading name, Chortex. Production at the mill finally ended in 2006, but the Chortex name and company lives on in alternative premises nearby. In today's business climate, such changes are inevitable, but we should be proud of the successful contribution the Taylor family and their faithful workforce have made to the local economy and the textile history of this company during the 20th century. We are fortunate to have a number of former employees with us who will be able to tell us exactly what it was like to work at Vicky Mill.
My name's Roy Sim, and I was an overlooker at the mill. I started in 1957 until 1999 with only a 4-year break when I lived at Morecambe, and the people that I remember, more than likely now, quite a few gone, but I do remember being the favourite of Mr Wilkes, Billy Wilkes, who was the works manager, because the joiner, Jack Blackburn, used to call him my dad. He said, your dad's been down. When Jack were in trouble, Billy used to go down and have a word with Jack. And he used to say, your dad's been down again. He said, you know, he said, I've got a right telling off. I won't have another word, he used to say. The top bosses, Taylor's family, they were fine, they were nice people, really, really. Mr. Kenneth was the most honest man I've ever known. We wanted a pencil, we went and got a pencil. But Mr. Kenneth put money in the box. And it was his mill, more or less. Them's the type of people, as honest Johns, as his grandfather was known, honest John. Really, really nice people. When Taylor's had it, and I became a shift manager, we could order anything in Bolton, Wigan, Lee, and Mr. Kenneth always said, everything has to be paid 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, it had to be paid. And that was it. And then when Spirella took over, you couldn't get anything, because they never paid. It went from being a family to an accountant running it. Yeah. John Story, I must admit that John Story, he made it his business to find out.
He's a good lad. He's
He's a nice fella. And he, you know, all right, if he didn't understand something, he'd come and ask.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But some of them, no, to posh for their own good. Another one, when we had a fire, the fire brigade used to come.
Yeah.
And Tommy Jackson and Snedden, a bloke called Snedden was fire chief then, but they always came, and they came at Mill, and they'd have they'd take all rollers where they got scorched, but them underneath were all right. So they used to drop all the water out of the fire engine in the mill yard, and then fill it with towels what were coming off, the fire damage. So they pile them all into the gap where water had been, and you know, drive off. And Tommy Jackson and all them, they always had towels. There was always towels when we had a fire, put down to fire, to insurance.
I'm Jean Haslam, and I worked in cellophane department for 33 years. When I first went, we did thousands and thousands of towels in box sets, and single wrap towels as well, and bales. There was one bale which had bath sheets, bath towels, hand towels, guest towels, dusters, tea towels, kitchen cloths, floor cloths, all that, you know, and face mats. That was like that, and they were wrapped in cellophane, because at first everything was wrapped in cellophane. And then they got this machine that put the towels through, like in a thicker polythene, if you will. And then it went through the shrink wrap tunnel, and they were all wrapped, you know. Like the some were in bales and different things. But then I think the packaging got too dear, the boxes. And, it went to more or less single wrapping, you know, single towels and bales, rather than the box sets.
So what would you say was the main changes through 33 years then?
Well, I think like things got too expensive. You know, like the packaging. But I mean, we used to do thousands and thousands and thousands of, and you used to make your own money. You used to have to make the box up and the lid, and then you'd put the towels on a board, cardboard, and put them in the box, pin them together, put ribbon on, or whatever. Some had bows, you know. And then, well, I think things got too expensive, and then like the cheaper towels came in. Because in the end, Lily'll know, there was no work in cellophane, and we all used to do crosswords.
I still
They
do.
knew, I mean, the bosses knew, you know, because they'd come in.
No work,
and they would just
bored
do
to
it.
tears.
Oh, so I took 2 years early redundancy. I used to look at that clock at 8 o'clock. I used to think, I'd never get through the day.
My name's Lily Dewson. I worked at Victoria Mill from being 14 till I retired at 65, but I did have a break in between, because when I was creeling winding, I went weaving. And when weaving went on shift work, I didn't want to do shift work because of my family. So I left and went somewhere else for a couple of years. And then they asked for me back. I went to see them and they said there were 2 jobs, cutting or examining towels. So I said, well, I think examining towels. They said, well, you've been a weaver, you know the faults. So I went and did that for a few years. And then I went into I lost a daughter and I just couldn't cope with this examining anymore. So I went into cellophane with the fancy packing and all this, you know. And that's where I finished my time. But going all through the mill, I made a lot of friends in each department, which lasted a lifetime, really, you know.
So which department did you like best?
Well, I didn't mind. I didn't care for the creeling or the winding, no. I enjoyed the weaving, and I suppose I would have stayed there if they hadn't gone on shifts. But I enjoyed it in the cellophane.
So can you just explain what creeling entailed or what winding entailed?
Well, creeling, it's the winders wind the yarn onto bobbins, and those bobbins go in a creel, which is a big frame, you know, and they wind it through a, what do you call it?
To read.
A reed.
A reed.
Adjustable
Onto a
reed.
big tin. And that tin then, when it's full, goes to the weaving, and then it carries on from the weaving, you see, to the twisting and things like that. But I didn't really like that, and I thought, I'll try weaving. And I enjoyed the weaving. I really enjoyed it, but on the Lancashire looms I worked. And I worked in the top shed, and then I went in the new shed where that's where I worked until I finished when they went on shifts. But in all departments I made good friends. And I never once said, oh, only after a holiday, oh, I wish I wasn't going back. I never disliked going to work. I wouldn't have stayed till I was 65, would I?
I'm Edna Taylor, and I was a Lancashire loom weaver when I first started work, and I learnt under, there was 2 looms under the warehouse. Was it Alice Cook?
Alice Cook.
Alice Cook, yeah, taught us. And then you went in the shed when you qualified, you see,
What's
on a
that?
loom in the shed.
Wilkes, Lydia Wilkes taught me.
Yeah.
There was 4 looms, 4 Lancashire looms together, and each learner had 1 loom apiece till they were capable. And I worked next to Jean's brothers, Peter and Keith, who used to torment the life out of me, get me in trouble, because Lancashire looms worked on a pulley, you know, and they kept knocking my pulley off, so I'd have to go for the overlooker, which my overlooker happened to be Alan Cookman. And I used to get in trouble for this. Then they used to fill my sleeves of my coat and that with fluff and stitch them up. Those are the sort of things we did, you know. Anyway, I carried on and went on to the Sarah looms when they changed to the Sarah looms. And I worked at the mill from being 15 till I retired at 65, which was 13 years ago. And I enjoyed it all. And I ended up as supervisor and weekend supervisor with Roy. We both worked weekend shifts, and we worked 12-hour shifts. And we had some good times, we had some bad times. But I can say we all enjoyed it. Because like Roy said, when you went on Sarah looms, you worked on picks. And I think I told you the other week, I worked with another girl called Anita Young. And this one week, for some reason or other, with no warps down, which of course stopped your loom, you know, while you had a new warp twisted in, with no breakdowns, so we didn't need the overlookers. And the pair of us came out, we'd made £18. It was never heard of. And the mills, like the Beehive and mills in Buck, were going on strike because of it. They said we cheated. But when they did investigate it, and we hadn't. It was just the sheer fat with no breakdowns and no warps down. And we made £18. And that was never heard of, you know. Little things like that, you know. It makes your life in the mill.
Well, there were quite a few people. How many would be working there at the peak?
900.
Yeah.
900.
900 people worked there. About
We
19
always had a good time.
What would it be? 1950s.
50s, yeah.
And that's only, I've only got that off Kenneth.
Yeah.
Because they were cut, you know, they'd gone, one shed had gone when I started.
Yeah, towards the end it went down and down, you know. But there was
think
still
they finished
quite a
it.
lot.
When
wasn't there?
when I finished 99, I think there was 200 and something all told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were producing more then
Yeah, because
than we ever did with all, you know, because they were so fast. I mean, it shows you on the video how fast they are. But
And I think our weekend shifts, we did very well, didn't we?
we did well out of
Yeah.
because we were, you know, you were there. There was nobody coming murdering you.
No,
You
we
didn't
just-
have a boss coming down.
No.
So if production is that much more efficient, does that mean you were earning more? Were you still on piecework then?
Well, they earn, well,
Yeah, they earned
the
it.
actual system as they introduced was, well, fool's errand. The weavers could rogue it. They could make, I'll tell you how they did it. Told Phil, it was Stuart Fillingham, the boss that introduced it, and said it's flawed. He said, no it's not, you're having that. And what they did, there's two weavers, right? They went down, they put a pin down, they stopped the loom, and it registered as an end down. So they did that, two of them, one on that side, and another weaver walking down and setting them on. And they was paid for how fast they mended that thing. Well, they weren't an end out. They just set it on and it was away again. So where it took like, we'll say 10 seconds to draw an end in and get it weaving again, it was only 5.
And this reduke is what you drew that end in with. So when that end broke, it meant finding the end, getting what we called a thrum, which is a piece of the yarn, doing a weaver's knot, putting it in its right place to go through the reed, and drawing it in through the yells with the reed, then through the reed. So you can imagine that would take 4 or 5 minutes as against.
They just, that's what they did. And they earned good money. They're finishing up on some of those weavers on there. They was earning £300 minimum
a week. Yeah.
So if it's doing that well, what went mill?
The Marks and Spencer's, Kenneth Taylor, when he was there, always said, right, you must never ever give Marks and Spencer's more than 25% of your production. But when he left, we got some other people, and Marks and Spencer's, they paid every fortnight, right? So the towels went out, and a fortnight later they was in. So it increased and increased, all for Marks and Spencer's. And then in 1999, Marks and Spencer's came along and said, well, we're transferring all our orders to Turkey.
Yeah.
End of story. So then we was left with John Lewis,
British
a few Arabs,
British
but nothing in comparison to the amount
That we had
that Marks and Spencer's took. So that was demise, and that's when we finished weekend shift. You know, they sent and said,
Mind
like,
you,
you know.
abroad, it was all cheap labour, wasn't it? So that's
Well, that's
why.
it. I mean, Turkey, it's even now. The towels are coming from Turkey now. Because Turkey have bought a share into Chartex. So the ones that are producing and these selling, well, they've learned and they've got it, and that's the end of it.
But it's still branded as Chotex when it comes
Yeah.
here.
Yeah,
Is
and
it?
that was only done because Chartex Mill, they shut it down in Chorley. And because this was always wave crests.
Let's talk about other things. I mean, you talked about Christmases and weddings and whatever else. But you've said before, haven't you, that there were lots of other sort of clubs, sports clubs, whatever else.
Yeah.
Rounders.
Rounders team.
How many can you remember?
Football,
Cricket.
rounders. Yeah, them were the main ones.
Yeah. And then they had a concert party, haven't they?
Yeah, they had the
Yeah.
concerts for Christmas,
Party.
which the
concert
public
party.
was invited into. It wasn't just the mill, the
All
public
ditto.
came in as well, and it was well known at Christmas to go to Victoria
Go
Mill
to Vicky
concert.
Where did you stage these? Did you have
In the
any-
Where the
canteen.
stage
It's
in
all
the
in the
canteen.
Yeah, in the
canteen.
canteen.
Stage
That
up
would
at
be the
bottom.
wooden canteen though, wouldn't it?
No,
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 no.
no.
Well,
Because-
I went to a concert there.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you're
it
right
was-
in
it
a
was
sense.
Yeah.
You're right in a sense, because if you remember,
We
at
extended
one
it.
time it was ladies that side and
Gents.
gents
Yeah.
that side,
Yeah.
and that gents side was only very small. It was only about this big, but the ladies side and the staff side was bigger,
Big.
and it was
As long
from
as
that
this.
Yeah.
to that, and at the end they made a stage
Stage.
and changing rooms at the back for the
I
separate
can
ones.
remember another
Right.
girl and me, because we were naughty, and we dressed up, called posh, but we still had our clothes and still some of our weaving clothes, working clothes, and we got on the stage and we sang, "We're a couple of swells,"
So what about works outings? Did you have
Yeah.
annual trips and whatever?
Well, I know the men did. I mean, my dad
Yeah.
used to go.
Yeah, I used to go.
Yeah, we
Used to
I
have-
don't remember.
Tattlers
doing
used
any of
to. Tattlers were like, we were always called a bit aloof. They were like, nobody seemed to like them.
it. They'd more money.
They did
than
more
anybody.
money, that's what. Never mind the
They
loot.
had more
Did
money.
more money.
And what's the just for the
But you
record?
go,
What's the definition of a tattler?
he
Overlook,
repairs the looms and any faults that occur on the machine. His sole job was to keep the
Keep
looms
the loom
running.
going.
But we go on outings. Now, we weren't allowed to all go together. So they went to the Isle of Man and Ireland, but Billy Wilkes, who's the works manager, would not let all the overlookers fly. Some had to go by boat, because he said that if that plane went down, we'd no bleeding tattlers, so you're not going.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
We used to go to Blackpool. They would have like the Winter Gardens. That were another we went, but that was just like a coach trip. And you went into Spanish Hall, at Winter Garden there, dancing. We were dancing there, and then eventually the mill used to hire Park Hall for all the mill and put coaches on, and you go and see whoever there's tartan was at Park Hall at China Richard. Did I at Barn for dances? Rivington Barn for dancing. But there weren't many places where you was welcome, because you used to always end up fighting.
I thought this was one big happy family. How come everybody was
Well, there
fighting?
was always somebody else
Drink.
who
Well,
come.
when
They
you had a
invited
drink.
some guests.
Oh,
See, there's
Yeah.
probably somebody from Haspel and Blackrod. Always fighting with Norwich lads.
Oh,
Same with
Yeah.
Westhoughton.
it was tribal, was it?
Yeah, it was like, well, what's he doing here? And then that was it then. It was all hell let loose.
One weaver said, when we went on strike for that day, and this weaver
Who we shall not
said,
name.
who we shall not name, said to me, "You won't get any more money." I said, "If I was on your wage, I wouldn't need any more money." She wasn't weaving then, she was over, but
No, it wasn't Edna.
no, oh no, it wasn't Ted.
So there was a union then, was there?
Oh yes,
Oh, yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah.
there's a union.
Close
yeah.
shops.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The overlookers were
I
a closed
gave it a
shop. You
boot.
didn't get in.
with the union
Oh.
thing.
Oh, they were one on the road.
So
they were on
yeah.
the road.
was that a rarity, a strike?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Oh
the one,
yeah.
It's only one.
Yeah.
yeah.
Only one.
There was only one strike. Well, two actually. I led one of them.
You've mentioned a lot of names. Any particular characters or individuals you want to mention? I mean, you talked about it being such a family firm, obviously. You've talked about the Wilkses. I think they were generations, were
Well,
they?
we called them the Trinity,
Right.
Yeah.
because
Oh,
Billy
same
was the
brother.
father,
Yeah.
Billy Wilkes was the works manager, his son worked there as assistant,
And
then,
Jimmy.
and Jimmy, is Billy's brother, was the preparation manager.
And Lydia.
So well, Lydia, but like they used to call it, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Which, you know, so that was the Trinity. You know, some of it, like you could talk about, you can't even, you wouldn't put it on
No.
there.
Well, no. No.
We had a wedding in the new shed. The weavers they used to have dress up. They had a wedding, and there was Vida Pennington was the bride, and Jean Barlow was the groom, and Annie Moss was the organ player, and I was a page boy because I was young, and Annie Moss had been away once to a slight mental hospital, and she was sat at the looms and was playing the organ, and Harold Cookman came up the steps, which was the shed boss, and everybody disappeared but Annie. Nobody told Annie, so she sat there, and Harold comes up and looks, and he just shook his head like that, and it was all, everybody around was watching. You can't hear anything because of the noise, but everybody was watching. It was hilarious. We were crying, and Annie's just there, and then she saw him. Oh, Harold! And that was it. Them the type of things that the weavers got up to. It was just a big family.
I mean, they were a great crowd, you know, and like Christmas on some of the photos. Christmas, there's always a foot-in, or anybody retiring, or any special birthday. We always had the food there, and, you know, it was great.
But as for the mill itself, I mean,
Absolutely
we had
brilliant.
some nice
Don't-
times.
Yeah, we
Oh,
did.
yeah.
Yeah.
You were sort of one group, weren't you?
It was
Yeah.
a really, really good. And each
Yeah.
department, there was no animosity or anything between departments even, you know. Other than like weavers always said, tattlers get more money than us, and you know. This is a film about the process of the towel making. This section is the yarn warehouse, the imported yarn that comes in as raw cotton. It is tested for strength, turns, quality on this machine by Carol. Each sample of yarn is turned to see if it unravels, etc. This is the yarn now being put in on a sizer's beam, which is then put at the back of what we call the slashing frame, which is a size where the raw cotton is now put onto the back of the slashing frame. The number of ends, that's the size being applied to the yarn, which is make it weavable, which is a strengthening agent, and then it's put through the slashing frame, goes in the rollers and is dried, and then it comes through from the back to the front, and all those ends are put on a weaver's beam, which is what's happening here. Now it comes into the weaving shed, and there's the loop beam at the top and the ground beam at the bottom. Those are the ends coming down, and the heels running at the back. You can just see through the yarn. That's making the patterns. And those are the heels. It's now weaving a heading, and it's forming the loop, and it's two loose, one fast, two loose, one fast, two loose, one, and that formulates the loop, which is the tow, well, they're called a terry. Those in the middle there are stitching things, stitching the side salvages, stop them coming unravelled in the processes after. Goes on the rollers. Those rollers are taken off and placed on those racks, and then they go to examination, which is this process here. The towels are examined for faults and counted. Then they go over into tubs, and then they're transferred up to the dye house, ready for the next process. When the towels get to the dye house, they then go into a bleaching frame to remove all the size and take them back to raw cotton. And this is done on this machine, which is the Bruckner bleaching machine. Highly technical. The towels go through each one of those chambers as a bleaching agent in caustic soda, and each tank is pumped by those raw pumps. It come out at the other end bleached, and then straightened out on that machine and go into being washed. All the bleach and everything is washed off, and then they're dried again. These are the tanks what mixes the caustic and the chemicals that bleach the towels, etc. All to a certain level. Now this is swatch dyeing. It amounts to companies send something they want to be matched to, some towels matched to a colour, and this little machine dyes them. It's what's called swatch dyeing, and it does a small section just to try and match the colour that the customer wants. Then it's cut up, and a small sample is placed in a separate machine, rolled into paper, now placed in a cardboard and put in this machine for testing the fastness of the dye. And it comes out and is red, and a graph appears on this machine here which tells you how fast or how not so good it is, whichever is appropriate. This is the dyeing process. The bleached towels are then put through the dye tank and are wrapped on these rollers and left on for 3 days to just revolve and all the dye run out, and then they are wrapped in polythene. Once that is finished, that process, they're wrapped in a polythene, and then they're just revolved for 3 days to get all the excess dye, as in that photograph there. Now they're placed and dried, the dyed towels. They're drying them now from the drying frame. and now they go to be side hemmed. This is a side hemming machine, which is the salvages that are on the edge of each towel are turned in and hemmed by this machine automatically. Each one's cut now. The end is cut. Makes them come to an individual towel. Now they go to the sewing girls who put the labels in. In this instance it's John Lewis, which is John Ella, which is their name brand. Then it goes to a girl at the back. The girl at the back now examines them and cuts the little bits of thread, etc., what's been left by the sewer, and she then stacks them into that size, into stacks of 6. Then the towels that are stacked, the 6 towels, then go to a shrink wrap machine. Which is this one, and they're then individually parcelled in 6s and then sent to the warehouse on this conveyor belt. This is the testing room where a towel from a batch is put through its paces to test for shrinkage. It's washed 25 times for colour fastness, how much it shrinks, etc. And there's one towel from each batch that's been dyed has to go through this process. This is the design room where in the later years we only produced plain towels. They were embellished at other companies. They were sent out and the design, this girl is designing a pattern for embellishment. This is the showrooms where every product that was made ever as a representation, the colours, bathrobes, everything that was woven. And there's some embellished towels that are going to John Lewis. They like their towels not in packs but in boxes. They would only accept them in boxes. And this is the transportation of the towels leaving. That's it.